candidate and other members of the committee, we have organized this panel with the goal to provide an overview of the city of Yes, and most importantly, to give the opportunity to our members who have joined us in person and other folks who have joined via Zoom, an opportunity to kind of develop a better understanding of what are the proposals included in this plan. And to do so, we have invited some members from city agencies and advocacy groups in the affordable housing arena, as well as our esteemed committee chair for the policy and legislation, Delaney, who will be providing us with an extensive research. She has created a fact sheet that will help everyone to understand what is on the table with regard to this proposal, and also what are some of the implications for our district. And without further delay, I would like to give our committee board chair, Clarissa Alellato, the opportunity to tell us why this is so important for our community board.
Thank you, Paola, and I want to say thank you to the Learnings Committee, Paola's committee, and everybody who collaborated to work really. As you know, Community Board 1 is delayed on where we stand, and this is an opportunity to, one, share what our perspective is and what took us some time to delay on this, but also, like, this is an intense plan, and there are a lot of things and a lot of factors. When this was presented to the board, it was just so much information, and we needed this to be broken down, and we needed to learn more about how this impacted Melrose, Mott Haven, and Port Morris specifically. And so we've been working hard, and our team has been working really hard to get that to the community so that the community has a real deep and better understanding in a simplified way, right? Because this is a lot of information. Like I said, there's a PowerPoint that has 70. I think, we're here to pretty much talk about the proposal and also talk about why it's important for our district specifically. So I'm gonna pass it off to the learning. Oh, I'm sorry, to Paola.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chair. Yes, we do wanna thank the staff member, Anthony, Jordan, and Stephen for all of the support, as well as our communications and technology team, Sangi, who has been instrumental to help us facilitate this conversation and give our members the opportunity to join remotely. We do have approximately 10 people that have joined via Zoom. So with that said, I would like to give, first of all, thank the representative from DCP, who has joined in person, as well as a representative from ANHD, the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, who will be also sharing their recommendations. And I would like to welcome our colleague from the Department of the City Planning, who will provide an overview of where the proposal is currently standing. We were in communications with Winnie Shane and with Nathan Heffron, who have, very graciously supported this presentation tonight. So please, you can begin your presentation. You have between 10 to 15 minutes to provide an overview. And we will be taking questions towards the end. We have also taken questions from the public. And please take it away.
Are you controlling the slides? Okay, should I just do the next slide then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about City of Yes for housing opportunity. We're going to start off with a quick...
You can adjust your mic closer to you.
Hello?
Oh, yes, it's this way.
Okay, never mind.
No, perfect.
Hello? Is that better?
Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Winnie Shen. I'm joined by my colleague Nathan Heffron from the Department of City Planning. We're going to start off the conversation with a brief refresher. I know folks had summer break, as folks have touched on, this is a large proposal, so we're going to just go over the major components of City of Yes for housing opportunity and how it pertains to Bronx 1, as well as provide a quick update about the modifications that were made at the City Planning Commission vote. So next slide. So again, we're talking about a citywide zoning text amendment. It is not a rezoning of any existing zoning districts, but it's a change of the underlying zoning text of the zoning resolution. And the main goal of City Yes for Housing Opportunity is to create opportunities for more housing across the entire city. Next slide, please. So there are essentially three main buckets to the proposal. There are low-density proposals, which are going to affect the areas shown in this map in blue. There aren't any low-density districts in Bronx 1, so we'll just quickly go over those proposals. It doesn't really affect this neighborhood. The main proposal that affects this neighborhood is the medium high-density proposals, or the universal affordability preference. We'll touch on that a little bit more. And then there are some proposals that have more citywide applicability. Next slide, please. So this shows the breakdown of the low-density versus the medium high-density districts in Bronx 1. As you can see from this map, there's no blue, so effectively there's only medium and high-density districts in this neighborhood. Next slide, please. So essentially, this is a citywide approach, so I think it's important to also know that we are making changes in other parts of the city for our lower density district areas, which are here shown in blue. And there's actually a range of low density districts. They go from districts that allow for single family homes, districts that allow for small multifamily homes, which are shown here in the darker shades of blue. And effectively, our existing zoning was really put in place in like 1961, and New York City is obviously very different from what it was in 1961. And our zoning has effectively restricted housing development in a lot of these neighborhoods. If you look at housing production data from last year, 10 community districts produce as much housing as the other 49 combined. So effectively that shows that not every neighborhood is doing its part to meet our housing crisis and our affordability crisis. Next slide, please. So again, this map just shows there just aren't any really low density districts in this neighborhood. Next slide, please. But I do think it's important just to like quickly note, I know in previous meetings you all had some questions about these proposals, so happy to answer those. So we're gonna just go over these. These are the proposals that would affect just like the low density areas. So the first two in this bucket are town center zoning, which is meant to encourage 2 to 4 floors of housing above a ground floor commercial storefront, as well as transit-oriented development, which is to encourage small apartment buildings in areas that are near transit and that are larger sites. And these two proposals, we call them missing middle housing proposals because they're meant to fill that niche between a single family home and a large apartment building, that in-between section of housing. New York City really hasn't been creating a lot of those types of missing middle housing. So these zoning changes are meant to encourage more of those missing middle housing typologies, like your small duplexes, quadplexes, these types of like smaller multifamily homes. Lastly, there's also accessory dwelling units or ADUs, and these are small housing typologies that we would allow for certain types of single family or 2-family homes. I'm happy to go into more detail about that later. And district fixes, again, just speaks to the fact that a lot of our low density districts have a lot of homes that aren't complying with our existing zoning regulations. We have a lot of multifamily homes in our single family districts today. And so the district fixes we're proposing are just small increases in floor area ratio, FAR density essentially, as well as heights to encourage for more housing, incremental housing growth in our low density districts today. Next slide, please. So we're going to shift our attention to the medium and high density district proposals. So the main proposal here, and one that we're really excited about as an agency, is called the Universal Affordability Preference, or UAP for short. And essentially, this is a preferential zoning framework that will encourage more permanently affordable housing in our medium and high density districts, or R6 and above. And essentially, next slide. This effectively allows buildings to be at least 20% bigger if you're doing permanently affordable or supportive housing. Next slide, please. And this map just shows, this would have a lot of relevance for this particular neighborhood because there's a lot of, all of it is medium and high density. So essentially, this doesn't affect market rate housing. If you're building a market rate building, you're still beholden to the existing zoning regulations. You still have to build to the same density and height requirements. But if you want to take advantage of those increased density bumps or higher height limits, you have to do permanently affordable housing. So that difference between the existing FAR, the existing density requirements, and the proposed higher ones, that difference has to be permanently affordable rent stabilized housing. Next slide, please. And what does affordability mean for UAP? Again, affordability for this is 60% AMI, and it's an averaging of 60% AMI. Next slide, please. So that essentially just means that we can serve a broader range of household incomes. I know averaging doesn't sound very exciting, but essentially means that we don't have to just market all of these homes at 60% AMI. It means we can also market to households that are below 60% AMI, so long as that entire building averages out to that 60% requirement. Next slide. So this is just an example, just to put that into more like concrete terms. So let's say you have a building in an R6 district. Today they'd be limited to 3.0 FAR, and for this hypothetical site, that gets you about 35 units. But because of universal affordability preference, they get a bump to a higher FAR of 3.9. And that difference between that 3.0 and 3.9, that 0.9 FAR has to be permanently affordable housing. And that gets you about 10 to 12 more units that are permanently affordable. Now again, a dozen more affordable units on this one hypothetical site may not sound like we'll solve the housing crisis overnight, but this is meant to have citywide applicability. So the idea here is that you have hundreds of sites over a number of years that are adding a dozen more affordable units. It adds up to a lot more affordable units for New Yorkers. So we did some initial back of math calculation and found that had UAP been in place since 2014, it would have created an additional 20,000 income restricted homes and housed up to 50,000 New Yorkers. Other changes we're making to help create more opportunities for permanently affordable housing is some updates to mandatory inclusionary housing, or MIH. Under today's MIH regulations, you can only map MIH options 1 or 2 alone, and there's another option called the deep affordability option, which is 20% at 40% AMI, that you can't map as a standalone option. Through the changes through City of Exeter Housing Opportunity, we're allowing the deep affordability option to be mapped alone. So if a rezoning ever happens in the future, the community would have the opportunity to advocate for MIH option 3 to be mapped as a standalone option for that area. And for the citywide proposals, we're making some updates to parking. So essentially, we're saying parking requirements are optional. New York City is very transit accessible. So the idea here is that by being very prescriptive of our parking requirements, we're actually restricting how much housing we can build in certain areas. I know that's a rich conversation, particularly for this neighborhood, so happy to answer and discuss that further. But just want to underscore what the changes we're making to parking requirements doesn't mean and what it does mean. The idea here is that it wouldn't affect on-street parking regulations or off-street parking regulations for purely commercial or industrial buildings. It's affecting residential buildings only. And it doesn't affect existing parking. So if a developer wants to remove existing parking today, they would have to go through and get an authorization from the City Planning Commission. This is for new developments that are coming up. The idea here is that the developer has a better understanding of what residents on the ground need for parking, because they want to lease up those units and will provide parking. And we've seen this happen in New York City today, where developers are over providing parking in instances where they don't have to. So these are some other changes we're making to promote housing on the margins. One is that we hear in the news a lot of like these empty office buildings. And one of the reasons for why some of those buildings haven't been converted to housing is because of zoning. So we're making some changes to zoning to make it easier to convert these vacant office buildings to housing. Go back, sorry. So there's 2 more proposals in this slide. One is about creating more different types of housing types. So one is like small and shared housing. The idea here is that a lot of folks who are like teaming up with roommates, like young college grads, who have 3 household incomes, and they're obviously able to outbid for 3-bedroom apartments and a single mother of 2 kids. So, but they would probably want to live alone, but there just frankly is enough like single like studios available for them to live in. So the idea is that by changing the zoning to create more opportunities for these small apartments, we can free up more of those family-sized apartments elsewhere. And for the last one is about making updates to infill or campus infill. So essentially a campus is like a large site where it's like over like 1.5 acres. There are some issues of doing adding additional housing, even though there's still development rights left on the table for a campus site. And this is one of the proposals that actually we made modifications at the City Planning Commission. Originally, when people think of campuses, their mind goes straight to NYCHA campuses, and they are included in like the campus in the strict definition, but after the City Planning Commission modification, they were removed from the proposal. So this no longer affects NYCHA. Their infill process will still be done exactly the way it is today and go through that resident engagement process, but the changes we're making to contextual infill for campus is no longer relevant to NYCHA. And that's a result of a lot of the feedback we heard from community boards as well as from stakeholder groups that we were speaking to. So I thought it was important to go through a little bit of the environmental review. So as part of this zoning text amendment, we also had to do an environmental impact statement, which is the most comprehensive form of environmental review. And we did this, and happy to go into methodology, but essentially we looked at it from like neighborhood level as well as citywide level to estimate impacts, both in terms of how many units of housing this proposal would promote, as well as impacts on our infrastructure. Next slide, please. So for units, like estimates for how much housing we'll probably see as a result of City of Exeter housing opportunity, we estimate an incremental growth between 58,000 to roughly 108,000. And the reason it's a range is because ultimately there's a lot of factors that go into what will create more housing, like housing market conditions, as well as will developers actually use these proposals. So that's why you see that range. And you see these shades of green. The darker green neighborhoods are areas that we predict will see a greater amount of housing being produced as a result of City of Exeter housing opportunity. The lighter shades of green are areas where we see less of an incremental impact of housing growth. Next slide, please. So this is particularly for Bronx 1. We see it in these like lighter shades of green. So we don't anticipate that much incremental housing growth being generated in this neighborhood, roughly about 0.5 to 1 unit per acre of housing over the next 15 years. So 15 years is the timeline we're looking at for these environmental impact statements. And that roughly translates to about 380 to about 970 units of incremental housing over the next 15 years for this neighborhood. So for actual areas of impact for our infrastructure, which I know is a robust conversation, we found for all the categories that are listed on the left of the slide, we didn't find impacts for these categories, for the ones listed on the right, for community facilities and services, open space and transportation. We did identify potential for impact as a result of City of Exeter housing opportunity in these areas for our infrastructure. And we're in open conversations with the relevant agencies that are responsible for like transportation, open space, and schools to let them know ways we can think about mitigating the impact caused by population growth from the housing industry generated because of City of Exeter. Next slide. All right, so just for concluding remarks, hopefully I did that in time. Essentially, the goal here is to address, as everyone in this room is well aware of, is our housing crisis. We just do not have enough housing available for New Yorkers. We're in a historically low rental vacancy. It's 1.4% of rental units are available for New Yorkers to rent. And the reason for that is one reason for that is because of our restrictive zoning. So that's really what City of Exeter Housing Opportunity aims to address, is these restrictive zoning regulations that have artificially constrained our housing growth and meant that we have not been able to produce the housing for all ranges of incomes for New Yorkers that need it, and has created all of the issues, the human consequences of our housing shortage that everyone is well aware of. So just for next steps, right now, actively, there is a city council hearing happening about City of Exeter housing opportunity, where there's, I think, at least 200 people still signed up to testify. If you have still an appetite to testify, I think you can do that after this meeting. But you can also submit written testimony for the next 72 hours to City Council as well. So that is the most current step for public review. Yesterday, there was the City Council asked questions from Chair Garanik about the proposal as well. That's online if you're interested about what your council member or other council members are asking about for this proposal. After this marathon hearing, there will be a vote by City Council, and that will happen sometime before the end of this year, and that's where the fate of City of Exeter housing will really be decided. We anticipate a lot of modifications and ongoing conversations happening with City Council between the hearing today and the vote, but definitely still open, of course, to community board's feedback and questions, and I'm really impressed that you all are still interested and invested in this conversation and learning more about this proposal.
Thank you so much. So
The goal to have DCP here with us tonight was to provide.
Can Paula use the mic, sorry?
She doesn't have a mic?
I do have, thank you. So the goal of having DCP tonight was to provide an overview and also to understand where things were standing. So thank you so much for that. And we also want to acknowledge the presence of the Bronx Borough President office here. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, we will be taking questions at the end. There are some questions submitted by the public. And now what we want to do is to give the opportunity to our City One Policy and Legislation Committee Chair, the Learning Memorandum, to provide an overview of what are some of those voting items, what are the most important facts included in this proposal as it pertains to our committee. She has done quite an extensive research, which we truly appreciate, and will be providing us with more insight. So this is a very important portion, and I encourage you to take notes based on the information that will be shared. Thank you so much, The Learning, for the work that you've done.
Okay, so hi, you guys. If you guys don't know me, my name is Delaney Lemorin. I chair the Committee for Policy and Legislation. Winnie, thank you for talking to us. I spoke to her last summer, her and John Higgins, about this proposal. So what I want you guys to understand is where we are. So because we missed the administration portion, we know that City Council is going to vote, and Thursday, I believe, we were going to finally, as a board, vote on the topics. There are 15 topics. I wrote a fact sheet that is not in sheet form yet, but hopefully it will be in sheet form by Thursday, that outlines and summarizes the 15 topics, some of which Winnie went over. But I also think I wanted to start off with, okay, so the reason we're going to vote on them is that we would write a letter, support, modification, opposition for Diana Ayala and for Salamanca, which represents our district. So that's where we're gonna at least make sure that our position is well-written in form for our city council people before they vote, right? So that's where we are in the process, since we kind of missed a process. We still get to advocate because, as Wendy said, there's gonna be a lot more changes done via city council, and we wanna make sure our changes are heard. Okay, so that's where we are, and we'll vote on that on Thursday. Topic by topic, and our fact sheet summarizes some of those topics, but I hope you guys ask questions here because full board meetings tend to be intense. So if you don't know what you want, how you want to vote, that will be a chaotic meeting. Okay, so I want to start off with what I know is a huge issue for our board: affordability. Affordability. When you talk, DCP is fully aware that CB1 has built numerous new developments. So that vacancy rate of 1.4, we have literally carried building new units on our backs. And Mount Haven's rent has gone up 85%, you guys. That is ridiculous. We are the #1 neighborhood in rent increase year to date, according to the New York Times, as of April. So I think this is really important that our rent went up even though we produced a lot, because we have produced. When Bruckner, South Bronx, Mount Haven got rezoned, it was rezoned before mandatory inclusionary housing. So it did not produce deeply affordable units. So therefore, you could get the former tax benefits, 421A, and have 130% AMI. And I really want you guys to understand these numbers. We keep on throwing AMI. What does that mean? AMI is a number defined by the federal government, HUD. We cannot change that number. I know at meetings we're like, I want AMI for the Bronx. That is not an option. It is one AMI. All we can control is the percentage of the AMI. So for 2024, according to New York City, 100% AMI is $108,000 for one family of one. Okay, that is a ridiculous number. 130% AMI would have been $141,000, which is again a ridiculous number. So I do want to commend that City of Yes gives us university affordability, UAP, which is optional though. That's the biggest beef with it, is that it is optional. However, it does go down to the average of 60% AMI, as DCP said, and 60% AMI for a family of one would be $65,000. And I do want you guys to know, as of 2022, the average income in the Bronx is $47,000. That is still not going to meet our AMI. The average salary in the city is $77,000. So we have an increase in poverty in the city. Our poverty rate is 27% of us are in poverty. The city average is 17. So there's a huge gap on units that are being labeled affordable and whether they're actually affordable for us. And I know that's going to be a big beef, a big contentious point for City of Yes, because the housing crisis is both twofold. There's not enough units, period. We concede that. But they're not affordable for a lot of us in the Bronx. And that's not great, okay? So I want you guys to understand AMI. I want you guys to know affordable. We use that word a lot. So when they say affordable, when they tell you percentage of AMI, you guys, that is important for us to understand. And it is a Googleable number, okay? Winnie brought up MIH. MIH is mandatory inclusionary housing. That is something that was, I believe, introduced in 2016. That is when things are rezoned or upzoned. That means the developer wants to increase density. Unfortunately, we don't, the biggest rezoning for us, which is the Bronx and some parts of the concourse, was done before the rule was passed. So some of those beautiful luxury buildings did not have some of that deep affordability number we want. So that's another reason you guys should know why some of those units are like air quote affordable, but kind of too expensive for all of us. So then I wanted to tell you guys, UAP Mont Haven, there's two other things I want you guys to know. I'm going to go by topic. Topic number 8. Can you scroll to 8? Topic number 8. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Topic number 8 is small units and shared spaces. Small units means the average apartment, you guys, should be about 680 square feet. It's called a dwelling factor unit. It just tells you how small a unit is legally permissible to be. And in 2015, we did come up with a building in 2015 under Mayor de Blasio. It was a 55-unit building, and the units were about 250 to 325 square feet. And it's an exception to the rule because there's a rule that building should be a certain way. In exchange for an exception to the rule, 40% of that building was affordable. So there's some rules that I agree are archaic, but before we used to have a quid pro quo. That means we'll give you an exception if you give us a lot more affordability. The only thing about affordability in the entire document is UAP, which is optional, which is just very insufficient. And then I want to scroll down to topic 12. Topic 12 is Silver Law. Silver Law, you guys, is about like tall buildings can't really be next to short buildings. I agree. It's like a real weird rule that doesn't really apply to us. But again, that in 2015 was a quid pro quo, meaning you could only get an exception to this rule if you increased affordability. And that was under a former DCP commissioner named Carl Weisbrod. So DCP obviously is an agency, commissioners change via mayor to mayor. But I do want to say we used to make exceptions to these rules that got us deeper affordability. And I believe one of my biggest concerns is that we are not creating enough affordability. In the past under different mayor leadership, we were doing more, okay? So UAP, MIH, Mont Haven affordability, sorry. I'm a lawyer, I always have talking points. And then I also want you guys to know, can you scroll down to 16, topic 16? There's technically not a topic 16, you guys, but there's a lot of other things that are changing that we don't get to vote on. I don't know why, but I want us to take a position on. So for example, if you can afford to buy something in New York City with a backyard, they want your backyard to now be smaller. I don't know why. I don't understand what the 10 square feet decrease. What are you going to build with that? They want the side yards to be smaller. They want the legal window size to be smaller. They want the inner courtrooms for buildings to be smaller. So there's a series of things that are not really things to vote on that will decrease. And I mean, like, if you can afford a backyard, just let it be 20 square feet. Like, especially if you're letting people build in it anyway. So I do want us to be clear that there are things that are not topics that are being changed that we should take a position on. I will not be here on Thursday when we vote on these things, so vote wisely. But I think we should also articulate our position on some of these just like little changes that to me is not gonna build another unit and just kind of decreases some of the quality of life. There's already 8 million of us in the city, so if you get to have a backyard, let it be a little bit more spacious. We don't need to exchange that. And so I just wanted to give you guys an overview of some of these changes and some of where I think is a big concern for CB1, which is affordability, access to these units, especially, I love the term of Nos Quedamos. A lot of people are born and raised in the Bronx, and we should benefit things that are affordable and not be pushed out. So what right now, the idea is that we are building for other boroughs who cannot afford to come in, and I don't know if we're building at a price point that is affordable for us. And the last thing I want to add is about these micro units, is that there is this idea if they're smaller units, people will leave their bigger units and move to a smaller unit. However, I think NYCHA is very informative in this. NYCHA residents hate to be resized. That is, they really do. They fight against resizing when they have to be downsized to a smaller unit. And so I don't know, just because we have an increase in micro units, if people are going to leave their bigger units. And we do know that there's a huge issue with family size units, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. The most affordable units created in the city under our current mayor's leadership are 1 bedrooms. So that means people with kids are struggling to find units. The largest stockpile of affordable 3 or 4 bedrooms is NYCHA, and we all know how hard it is to get a NYCHA unit. And the last thing I would say is Section 8 was open for 1 week in New York City. It had 633,000 applicants. And that is important for you to understand how many people are searching for affordable units. And the best case scenario for City of Yes housing is 180,000 units in 15 years. That means that the demand is not going down anytime soon. So that means the price point's not going down soon. So it's important that we vote for something, or we ask that something does more to protect affordability, even if it's just a little bit more. The vacancy rate is 1.4. That's the number that was shared with us. That number is surveyed every 3 years. Thank you for telling me that, Ted, how you get to this number. Every 3 years, we survey how many vacant units are in the city. You can imagine how small that number is for affordable units, meaning rent stabilized, rent control, things of that low major. That number is probably even less than 1.4 because 1.4 is reflection of all apartments, meaning market rate as well. So that's my summary. I think the highlights that I think are important for our district, our community board. I don't know who's next.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Delerny. Can we please give Delerny a big round of applause? Just because, you know, going through all of these texts is not an easy task, and I'm pretty sure that she put quite some time to do this. So thank you so much. Now, we would like to give the opportunity to the representative from ANHD to provide some insight as to how the affordable housing advocacy groups are responding to this issue. So I believe we have Chris Walters in the Zoom still. And we're gonna get him on the screen now. They provided their fact sheet. So if you have this document in your packet, this is the document that I am referring to. Chris Walters, thank you so much. This is your time. You have between 10 to 15 minutes. And we would love if you could give us an overview of what are some of those recommendations that ANHD has provided, as well as any other insight that you might have. We know and we have communicated that there was a hearing today at the City Council. So if you already have some, some of that that you could share, we would really appreciate it. Thank you, Chris. You can take it away now.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me. And sorry I'm not there in person. I did just drop in the chat for folks who are on Zoom to a link to our recommendations, so you can download it there if interested. And yeah, I believe that the council hearing is actually still ongoing. So I think something like 700 folks that had signed up to testify both in person and on Zoom. So I can be fairly brief, but yeah, my name is Chris Walters. I'm the Senior Land Use Policy Associate at the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or ANHD. And again, we were invited, I think, to give our perspective. We are a member org, so our members are community-based organizations in all 5 boroughs throughout the city. They are community development corporations, affordable housing developers, community organizers, tenant organizers, affordable housing advocates in general. So I'll start by saying, we support the stated intentions of of City of Yes for zoning for housing opportunity. We've long called for a more equitable distribution of development in the city. We've seen too much development concentrated in too few neighborhoods, and primarily in lower income neighborhoods of color that really bear the brunt of that new development for the city, citywide. So we do believe that this would help to move us towards more equitable development, creating more housing in exclusionary neighborhoods that have not done their part over the decades. As you've all said, that's not the case with CD1, which has built a lot of housing when you look at citywide numbers. So again, sort of the flip side of that, we think that this will lead to more equitable distribution, but also what we're really focused on are ways to prioritize and maximize opportunities for affordability. So we don't want just increased housing supply, we want increased affordable housing supply. And that's largely what our recommendations are focused on. So the first one, if you want to scroll down, thank you for sharing this on the screen too. The universal affordability preference. Again, this is, I think, the most relevant piece to CD1 as well. So most simply, we just want to say that the city should add a mandated deep affordability band to the affordable units that will be created through UAP. So as DCP mentioned, currently they'll have to average out to 60% AMI. We're suggesting you can keep the average to 60, but just have a mandated band in there that is serving 40% AMI. That's around 56,000 for a family of three. Just as a way of ensuring that we're getting some housing for very low income households in there with UAP. And then our second piece there, I'll keep it kind of top level. If folks have questions, I can dive in deeper, but is to increase the size of the density bonus for affordable units. It's a minimum of 20, and then in some districts it actually already is a bit higher. And we're saying make that uniform across all mid and high density districts so that we're seeing a higher density bonus than 20%. Ideally as high as 77, could be somewhere in between 30, 40, 50. And we believe that you can do that within scope without raising the overall density. So still looking at the density levels that City of Yes is proposing, but just tweak the ratios so that more of that density is incentivized for affordable housing. And we believe that what you see in practice there then is that you see, in particular, larger 100% affordable buildings, larger mission-driven development buildings, and then 80-20 for-profit developers would still likely be building at that 80-20 ratio, but not as large as you could build an all-affordable building. And then our recommendations on the lower density, again, not directly relevant to CD1, but we think very important, again, in terms of getting that more equitable distribution throughout the city. Just noting that the low density proposals do not have any affordable units required as currently written. We believe this is also a fair housing issue. You want to make sure that you're concentrating affordable units throughout the city in exclusionary neighborhoods, again, not just in the higher density, historically lower income neighborhoods of color where you're seeing a lot of them today. And so we're asking for in the town center zoning and in transit oriented development that the proposal should require affordable units for developments over 10 units. And that's the same unit size that the 485X, the new 421A tax abatement program, and that's where that kicks in. It's also the same unit size where mandatory inclusionary housing kicks in where it has been mapped by the city. And then lastly, with the low density, we want to make sure we believe in APDUs. We're very happy those are in the proposal, accessory dwelling units. We want to make sure that subgrade, that basement units are included in there, and that the zoning changes are made that are needed to help legalize those basement units and allow them to be legal accessory dwelling units. For residential conversions, we want to just make sure when places are going from commercial to residential, we want anti-harassment and retention protections in place for existing commercial and nonprofit tenants. And then lastly, non-zoning commitments. So, we obviously recognize that zoning is just one piece of creating a more equitable city and a more affordable city. We also need to make sure, hand in hand with this, that we're seeing increased funding for organizing, for outreach, and for technical assistance, as well as funding for city agencies to make sure that existing laws are being obeyed, that homeowners and tenants are aware of these changes and can take full advantage of them. And lastly, along those lines as well, funding and an expansion of the city FEPS voucher program to make sure at-risk households can stay in their homes and can find homes. The last thing I'll mention, which we didn't put on there, is that we also strongly support making MIH option 3 a standalone option. That's the deepest affordability option for MIH, and City of Yes would change the zoning to allow MIH option 3 to be mapped on its own. At the moment, it has to be paired with another option, which are higher income than option 3. So we believe, hopefully with these changes to UAP and MIH option 3, that we would be, taking good steps towards getting broader and deeper affordability in more neighborhoods, especially medium and higher density neighborhoods throughout the city. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Happy to answer questions when we get to that as folks might have.
Chris, thank you so much, and thank you for all the work that you guys do at ANHD. So we had invited Council Member Rafael Salamanca and Councilwoman Diana Ayala, and as you have heard, they are currently in the hearing. So Sonji, how can we?
Ayala is on
Yes.
virtually.
Is Ayala or herself or a staff?
No, Diana Ayala here.
Hi. Hi, good evening, Diana. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for taking the time. So we would really appreciate if you can tell us on your own words, what is the current situation with the proposal? We have also prepared some questions that our Vice Chair, Susan Camerata, can provide to you. So we can read those questions, and then you can feel free to take it away from there. So I'm gonna give Susan the mic, and you can read the questions. And you let us know if you can hear us, okay?
Okay.
Good evening, council member. First question is, affordability is a major concern of this community. Why is the creation of any affordable units only optional, whereas places like Westchester County had mandatory set-asides of 10%?
That's a good question, but it's not a question that I can answer because it wasn't our proposal. We at the city council are tasked with reviewing the proposal put in front of us by city planning and making recommendations on changes. I have heard, some of your concerns tonight, and I agree with just about all of them. I think that there has to be more of an incentive to develop affordable housing, but I just want to remind folks that this proposal is not specific to just one type of housing, but rather housing development in general. And that is because we have a supply and demand problem in New York City, right? With the vacancy rate being what it is, as low as it is, historically low, there is a need to develop market rate as well. There are home ownership implications here. And so right now, I'm really proud of the fact that in the 8th Councilmatic District, we came in number 3 in terms of the development of affordable housing citywide. We have, we've done a lot of work to ensure that that's the case. But I think that, these conversations help inform what our demands will be before we vote on this project.
Thank you. Do you think that this proposal does address the needs for the residents within CB1?
Not necessarily, no. But again, when we're looking at it globally, it's not a CB1 specific rezone. This is not a rezoning, right? So this is we're changing text here to allow for for instance, churches, right? That were mentioned. We have a lot of churches that are dilapidated. I think that that's an area where this would probably be helpful, right? It would allow those churches that do not get government funding to be able to, get a new and improved, church, while at the same time helping to create more housing in the community. Because so like, let's say City Island has a lot of low density. Not enough housing is being constructed here. This is and every community should be building, their fair share. I think that we've done our fair share, and I'm really proud of that, and I will continue to build affordable because I think that we should. But there are parts of the borough of the Bronx that are not doing their part, right? That are not developing at the same rate, that communities that haven't changed in years. And while that works for them, it doesn't work for the rest of the city. So the church component, I think, works for us. I think that the additional, height and what I call MIH, because it's really MIH, option is good in communities where you may have a low density block, right? So you may have private buildings that have no city affiliation, and a landlord may want to develop it. Redevelop it. If they just redeveloped it with current zoning rules, they would build whatever they want, right? So you could theoretically end up with a whole block full of condos, whereas with this option, with these changes, they would be forced, right? They should be forced, but they're actually not right now, into creating affordability. The idea that it's optional is created as a way to attract that type of development, and it does work. But it isn't mandatory as it should be.
So this is not a question that was on the sheet here, but as our chair of the Policy and Legislation Committee, Delorne Morin, stated, do you see a pathway to encourage larger apartments being built? We are in desperate need. I know you know that, but.
One of the things that we've been fighting for, whenever I review, going through projects, I have seen it, I heard this earlier mentioned that a lot of studios and one bedrooms are being developed. And even in the cases where we have 2 and 3 bedrooms, the sizes of those units are significantly smaller than they have historically been. And I think it's because developers want to maximize the number of units that they're constructing, but they're doing that at a cost to renters. We would like to be able to see a change in that, but those are things that council members can and the community board can negotiate, right? Whenever there's a rezoning, which this is not a rezoning, we have an ability to negotiate that. So for instance, I had a project that had over 340 units of affordable housing. 15 of those were 3-bedroom apartments. And historically, Black and brown communities, we, truthfully have larger families. I get people that come into my offices all of the time asking for, help getting an apartment for larger units. So I cannot, unless I have data, support, the construction or this very heavy construction of studios and ones when I know that I have a higher need for 2s and 3s. Those are things that we negotiate now, but I think that those are the conversations that I'm also having with city planning, is really ensuring that that's part of the conversation, and that's why it's important that the community boards weigh in, right? So that we're looking at this proposal holistically, and I want to say, this is my opinion, is that this is not the solution to all of our housing problems, right? This is just one of the tools the city will use to get there, but this is not, and we still have an abundance of applications that have been approved already through the city council, UDOPs that have passed, been voted on, that are sitting at, HPD's desks waiting to be financed, and that's also a part of it, right? So there's a lot of things have to happen in order to change the dynamic, but we've run out of land, right? So now we have to start thinking constructively about how do we develop, how do we continue, to maximize our ability to develop in communities where you have such significant lower density and, we're in a housing crunch.
What is your position on the City of Yes proposal and why?
Yeah, I haven't necessarily taken a position yet. I'm not one, I'll be honest, I don't think that this is a case where I would want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that because this is Again, we're talking about a 15-year plan. If you divide that, by the number of units that we're anticipating constructing in the district, that amounts to roughly over 60 units a year. That's not significant enough for me. But again, I understand that this is not intended to be that. This is intended to be a tool, not the tool. So I have not yet made up my mind. One of the things that were really important to me was the removal of NYCHA from the campus deal. I didn't think that was an appropriate. I didn't feel like we should be giving away our power to dictate, the type of infill that may or may not happen in public housing. But it may work for like a cooperative, like a Co-op City, right? Co-op City has enough land and they choose to, right? They have a right to develop on their property and make some money off of that. For public housing residents, it wasn't gonna be, optional, right? It was something that would have happened. And so I'm really happy that city planning heard those concerns and removed NYCHA from the list. But, I have concerns. We'll continue to negotiate. The hearing yesterday was to hear from the city. Today, they heard from over 700, people that signed up to speak, in favor or against. We'll use all of those opinions, suggestions to help guide our vote. But, we are thinking we have a greater responsibility is to think globally. And so the tweets that we make, should be representative of the community's needs, but they may not cover everything that we need.
Thank you very much for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Chair Paolo Martinez.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker, for all the work you are doing. Thank you. If we have a representative from Council Member Salamanca in the room? Okay, so if we don't, that was the list of presenters for this evening. Now, we do have questions that we have received from members of the Community Board 1. And what I would like to do, I would like to encourage those of you who are participating via Zoom this evening to put your questions on the chat. And what we will do is to summarize all of those questions that we received this evening and share with the presenters today. So that way we can create some type of guide based on those questions and disseminate those via email. We can share those to the folks that joined tonight and also to the community board members at large, along with the fact sheet that the learning has created. And I believe you received the presentation for tonight, but there will be a good amount of information that can be shared. I do want to pose these questions that we received earlier, because one thing that we are doing is to encourage participation from our membership, and these folks submitted their questions prior to the event. And anyone in the audience can answer if you have the answer. If not, we'll continue to do a little bit more of research, but I'm confident that some of you can answer this question tonight. And I also would like to thank Mr. Ted Weinstein. Thank you so much, Ted, for joining us this evening. You are a real trooper. Thank you so much. And the question from our RSVP sheet was, clarity on what are the AMI percentages and unit maximums and minimums breakdowns of affordability in all housing in all points, residential development and commercial conversions, as well as clarity on rezoning and bypassing the Euler. So folks wanted a little bit more clarity on those. I think that from the presentation from DCP, we have some of that information, but again, we can repeat some of that because we do have time. And then development on and what restrictions are in place to protect communities. That was the first.
It's a lot.
Feel free to answer what you heard.
We're gonna start from affordability for conversions. So there is a state tax incentive that is meant to make it more financially feasible to do these commercial conversions to residential. So if any developer is taking advantage of this tax incentive program, it's called 467N, another combination of letters and numbers there. But essentially, if you're doing this tax incentive program, 25% of units have to be affordable, averaging out to about 80% AMI. And 5% of those units have to be affordable to at or below 40% AMI. And we anticipate a lot of developers who want to do these commercial conversions will take advantage of this tax incentive program, and that will create these affordable units through that. And I think there were like a lot of other questions in that conversation.
Yes, and I actually, so Alex is this point.
Okay. So rezonings, City of Yes, housing order doesn't change. If any applicant comes forward and wants to change the underlying zoning district, if they want to upzone an area, they still need to go through ULURP. They still need to file for the application. If they want to change from like an R6 to an R7, anything like that, that City of Yes isn't affecting that process at all. Clarity on landmark transfer of development rights. Yeah, so that's one of the proposals that we didn't touch on in this presentation, but essentially today for, make sure I don't drop your phone. So for today for landmark transfer development rights, you essentially have to apply for a special permit, which is arguably like the most complicated form of like land use approval process aside from ULURP. And because of how restricted we've made the landmark transfer development rights special permit, there's only been like 15 successful applications for it. And when you have a landmark building, and not every building in a historic district, I know there are historic districts in this neighborhood, not every building in a historic district is a landmark building. Like a landmark building is a separate designation that like LP Landmarks Preservation Commission has. And it's like a lot of money to like upkeep a landmark building, you need to like maintain the facade and everything. So, and you also can't really like redevelop a landmark building. So they might have like remaining development rights on the table, meaning like they could in theory, if they weren't landmark, build a bigger building, but because they're landmark, they're effectively like locked into what that building is today. And the radius for what they can do is like, in theory, you can be able to sell your unused development rights to like other lots in that block. And the transfer radius is, actually, can we pull up the slides again from our deck if that's possible? This is helpful to see for like a visual. Sorry, I didn't mean to surprise you with that request. If you go to the appendix and just like scroll down.
That's towards the end.
Yeah, towards the end. Okay, so yeah, go to 49, slide 49. Yep, perfect. Okay, so that's what what you see in the current, and then so if you focus on this so you can see, yes. So for what you see in the current is what the current transfer radius for like a landmarked building. So it's that dark pink color. Today they're limited to only the lots that directly touch that building or directly across the street. So it's a small transfer radius. So there's limited opportunities to transfer your development rights. So one of the changes we're making to the landmark TDR program is expanding that transfer radius to all of the lots on the same block as the landmark building, as well as all the lots that are directly across the street or across the intersection. So you can see that being demonstrated there. The other update we're making is we're making it not a special permit process, so that it's like more feasible to actually apply for, to do it as an authorization. We're also allowing this to be an option for any landmark buildings that are in historic districts. So under today's special permit, if you're in a landmark building in a historic district, and I don't believe any landmark buildings in this neighborhood are in historic districts, I think they're all outside of it, so it's not relevant. And the other change that's not relevant to the neighborhood is if you have a landmark building today in like an R1 to R5, like a lower density area, you also can't transfer your development rights. So we're just expanding the universe of where you can actually transfer these development rights. And this is meant to help like people who are really interested in like landmark preservation for like keeping those landmark buildings like more financially viable, like actually creating more, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Wait, I think just to build on that question, I have a question. Sure. Should I use a mic only? Because should be.
Yes, please.
Because it's Zoom.
Just to build off of this, I understand that you guys are getting rid of it being a special permit, but it seems that you're getting rid of the special permit also got rid of the community board portion and got rid of the city council portion. So the decision about landmark transfer, which I understand might not be that relevant over here, just is gonna become an internal DCP decision and no longer will have any community intake.
So that's a great question. So there's gonna be, the special permit's gonna be like turned into either a certification, which is essentially is like the city planning commission just approves it, so long as it follows regulations. If there's no bulk modifications needed on the receiving side. So essentially, if, let's say, this landmark building wants to transfer some of its remaining floor area to another site across the street, if that site doesn't need to like fundamentally like change any of its underlying existing zoning to accommodate that additional floor area to like build that bigger building, the applicant just needs to get a certification. So yes, the community board and city council are involved in that process. However, if a landmark building is transferring its development rights and that site needs bulk modifications, like it needs to get like something changed to accommodate that additional density, then they'll need an authorization and the community board is notified if an authorization is filed, but city council is not involved in that process.
Thank you so much. Now, those questions were from our community board members who submitted those questions via the RSVP. Now, we want to give the opportunity to some of the folks that have joined via Zoom, who are very active, to answer some of their questions. So this is from our chat. And the question is, what mandatory protections are in place in the City of Yes proposal for re-legalizing small single units, micro apartments, to prevent the same issues that occurred for its being made illegal, such as unsafe and overcrowded living conditions in tenement housing, which often resulted in cramped, poorly ventilated spaces with inadequate sanitation for large number of immigrants? And what are some of the protections for tenants in this proposal? Who wants to answer that question? Any insight that you can provide?
I can start and then maybe so, great question. So to create like these shared housing, we're creating like a normal like apartment building, these are called dwelling units. For shared housing, they would be called rooming units. And there would be limited to 2 people per rooming unit. And they would have like leases that are tied to that rooming unit. Effectively, it's very similar to how like folks who have roommates sharing an apartment today, would be sort of that living situation of like you have your own private bedroom and you're sharing maybe like a kitchen and a bathroom with some other folks. But the lease would be different because it'd be tied to your rooming unit versus like for an apartment, everyone's on that lease. So that also offers more like flexibility, of course, for tenants who are choosing to live in rooming units. This is something that we've been really involved with a lot of conversation with HPD, Housing Preservation Development, about, and they're working on a shared housing roadmap to answer some of these questions about how rooming units will be maintained and like what kind of like making sure that these are safe and habitable like housing types. And to be honest, it speaks to like, there are shared housing models that live in this like weird gray legal area today in New York City. So that's just because we don't like create legal rooming units doesn't mean they go away. They are still present in our housing market today, but arguably tenants who live in these rooming units today and these shared housing situations, they just don't have the same tenant protections that we can maybe offer. We offer like a legal framework for these shared housing models to exist.
Well, speaking broadly, not just about shared housing, but about all of the aspects of these proposals, enforcement will, as it is now, enforcement will be necessary. So whether it's somebody doing an add-on, somebody converting a basement, somebody doing shared housing, somebody doing UMP, any of these, there will be continued, they can't just do them. They need to apply, they need to file a plan with the building department, as always. The building department will be inspecting to make sure that what the people said they were going to do, they do. And where they're using HPD financing, our people will be going out to make sure that that what is being proposed and being paid for is being done. So in all aspects of this, enforcement will be necessary as it is now.
Thank you so much, Ted. I will take another question from the chat. And this one is about, okay, So this is more related to the environmental report that DCP conducted and some of the work that you are doing on regards to that matter. More buildings may be electrified, like one of the buildings proposed. How will this affect the energy infrastructure? And I will combine that question with a similar one that was asking for increasing affordable housing units and marketing to people that need it. And I believe there was another similar question with regards to air quality, waste management, and other, the impact of the proposal in the communities.
Yeah, great question. I think maybe it's hinting at, we have like local law 97, which is requiring more buildings to meet certain like energy requirements, which is good because as one of the other City of Yes text amendments, the first one was City of Yes for carbon neutrality, and that was focused on making zoning changes to encourage for more sustainable, greener buildings. And that's arguably like, that's good. We are facing a climate crisis among the other crises we're facing as a city. So I think for the environmental review, we didn't identify impacts on our like energy infrastructure. The ones we identified was like open space, transportation, and our community facility and services, which speaks more like schools. And the reasons we identified impacts there is because for City Yes or housing opportunity, it's meant to like create more housing units, and because there's going to be more housing, there's going to be an increase in population growth as well. And I think that ties into like the more broad question about how are you creating more affordable housing? Well, the main proposal for generating more affordable housing, again, as Delaney spoke about, was universal affordability preference, which we think will dovetail really nicely with another state tax incentive program, the update to 421A, it's called 485X now. And we think that historically 421A, the previous tax incentive, worked really well with our inclusionary housing framework, and developers would take advantage of the tax incentive and this zoning density bonus and work together to create like affordable units. So we think because of 485X will tie along really nicely with UAP and create that incentive, that financial incentive for developers to take advantage of the UAP zoning framework to actually produce those affordable units.
Thank you so much. So I think that answered some of the main questions that we have received. We do have more questions, but what we will do is to summarize those questions to share with the panelists this evening, and that can help, us continue the conversation and the educational portion for our committee. Now, I would like to take the opportunity to take questions from those folks that have joined tonight. And I know that RG has already raised her hand. And thank you so much, RG, for all the work you do, helping us organize and set up the spaces in each one of our meetings and special events. And also we have a question from our district manager, Anthony Jordan, and one more question. So we have those three that we hope to answer this evening. Let's start there. And I think we're doing well with time. So the question from our district manager, I will just read it. How is NYC HPD working to perfect the current Housing Connect system to ensure better connectivity for applicants to apartments they are applying to? Right now, statistics are showing that applicants apply and are waiting an average of 3 to 7 years for consideration. This question is for HPD and the Council Deputy Speaker.
I don't actually know that it's 3 to 7 years. I don't think it's that long at all. But, it's one of the things about the process for the Housing Connect and the famous lottery system is that when it changed over from being a manual system with paper applications that had to be obtained and filled out and sent back each time that somebody wanted to apply to a building, and then it was computerized. So you now have a system where you just go into the system, you establish your profile, your household, your income, and that, and then you can just click on, you get to the slide which shows you how many and which different buildings at that point are taking applications, and you can just go down the list, go click, 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 click. And then, you'll be able to, possibly be able to be interviewed for those units. I don't want to call it the problem, but the reality is that it's very successful. In that people will apply, and you may have a building, let's say, with 100 apartments, and 5,000 people may be applying, which again, just shows the great demand that there really is for affordable housing. So many people, I'm constantly hearing from the big committee boards, people say, well, nobody we know ever gets into these buildings. Of course, it's just not correct. It's just that so many people apply and then just don't get it because there is such a demand. It's like the lottery, it's called the lottery for a reason. So like I said, for every 100 units, there could be thousands and thousands of applicants. Many of them just won't even hear anything. But then the process itself, and the reason what that is done is we have a marketing unit that handles this. If there's funding from the City Housing Development Corporation, then they have a marketing unit which also handles it. And we have to make sure that the people who are getting the apartments are income eligible or deserving or getting into the correct apartments. And that ensures fairness. But there are many people that, when I go to meetings, for everyone who says, well, we don't know anybody, there are people sitting right there who are living, including tonight, who are living in buildings that went through that process.
Thank you so much, Ted. And going back to the chat, so yes, we do see a statement from Ramona. She has some feedback on City of Yes from her organization, and she would like to share those. Yes, Ramona, please share those. You can feel free to email me the statement, and we can put it on the summary. And we can also share any remaining questions with the panelists this evening. I also want to address the question from Christine Licata. She's asking, what are the possibilities of our recommendations tonight being included? Those recommendations with the vote that we're taking on Thursday, that information will be shared with the local elected officials, and they will take it from there. As you know, they are the ones who have the voting power over these proposals, but we genuinely thank the Deputy Speaker, Diana Ayala, for joining this evening, and I know she's listening. Now, with regards to the questions we're taking from the audience, I will ask that you limit your participation to questions so that we can maintain the order of today's event. And if you do have statements, please share those with us via email so that way we can share within our summary.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Argelia Ortiz with Community Board 1, of course. My main concern is, of course, with the parking situation and the traffic. Because one unique situation in our district is the fact that we are actually one of the busiest intersections in the city. We actually are. So it's going to be very difficult for a person to have a car in our district if this end parking mandate takes place. And I think that's going to be a big concern to the residents, particularly of our district. The slide number 20, I don't know if you want to bring that up, but there was information on that slide that didn't come out manually on the manual that was given to us, I noticed. And so, yeah, okay, you're gonna bring it up on the screen. Yeah, the non-change of that particular part did not come out on our page 20, I noticed, but of course, so the overall question is something that is of concern to so many populations in our district. The parking, the traffic, which is kind of a permanent situation that has existed for a long time in our district, and that is my main question.
Thank you so much, Archie. That was very well articulated.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think there's a chance like we shared these slides a little too late for them to get printed out, and I'm sure folks will share later so you can look at this information. But this slide is just meant to emphasize how the changes we're proposing. Well, firstly, I hear you about how this neighborhood is probably like a car-dependent neighborhood, and we recognize that when we went to different community boards in like the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens that are far away from subway stations. They're saying like we need cars to get around. Like that is a reality we recognize. On the flip side, we're also going to neighborhoods that are really transit accessible, and like developers in areas that are like Greenpoint are saying they have these empty parking garages that they were forced to build because of zoning that are just empty and they could have turned into housing. So that's the reality of like the other side of that coin, is that our parking requirements have created a lot of empty parking spaces. But we hear you definitely about how, you know, here it sounds like you probably have like double parking, traffic situations. And what we can say to that is, for our transportation division, have looked into developments and have found generally in neighborhoods where there is that high car dependency, developers are still providing parking spaces and often exceeding what they're being required to provide under today's zoning. So we anticipate that will continue, because if you're a developer, you're profit motivated, you want to lease up your units, you want to make sure people will actually want to move into your building. So you will provide parking in areas where there is that demand, but definitely hear you on that. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, I had a bunch of them, I'm gonna put it into a couple. So, first has to do with, she actually mentioned it, but I don't think I had a clear answer. So the DEIS says that there are no impacts will happen in these categories: energy, air quality, and waste management. So with climate change issues, you said outside is kind of warm in October. So there will be a need to provide alternative energy and more energy infrastructure, right? For new buildings that might be electrified. And then, so why is these three are not shown as having an impact, which will have an impact, because you're talking about the whole city. So why is that the DI is not showing that? That's one, and then I had another one too.
You can just say them, or you go.
Well, the second one has to do with, I have 6 of them, but this one has to do with topography. So, in geology, in Red Hook, you can build very tall buildings because they're marshlands. So, so they say you have a certain height limit in certain places because the weight of the buildings, they might sink or split. I think one of them was Red Hook. That's the reason why they don't have a lot of buildings above 10 floors. So it says, so regarding topography and geology, would those places that might have the limits, would they have different regulations? You know, and because we don't want only big buildings in only certain sites.
Yeah, so those are good questions. So for the DIS is the draft environmental impact statement. We released like the final environmental impact statement. So it's called the FEIS now. But the reason why we didn't identify impacts in areas like energy and waste management is because the spirit behind City of Guest housing opportunity is that it's like incremental housing growth. So the amount of housing that we produce in each neighborhood is not as dramatic as if like a neighborhood rezoning, those would produce more units of housing and larger population growth. And that will result in like greater like effects on our infrastructure because it's like such a smaller increase in housing. That's the reason why we did identify impacts in those particular areas. I think for like our other text amendment, City Guest for carbon neutrality, that was one that was really focused on creating more like energy efficient buildings, because we do recognize, like, I think one of the, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but our buildings, because they're so fairly old, are one of the biggest producer of like greenhouse gases. And we're trying to make sure we can do changes through zoning and like other codes, like building code, to create more energy efficient buildings moving forward, and making it easier for existing buildings to be built to like higher energy standards. So it's like a reality we recognize and have been trying to address with the tools we have available. For your other question about like Red Hook, I don't know off the top of my head, but we do have.
I gave Red Hook as an example. I'm talking about the whole city. The whole city, there are certain areas that the geology doesn't allow for tall buildings. Red Hook is one of them I just love.
Yeah, for like building, like for neighborhoods that are like on our waterfront like that, a lot of times there's like special districts that may cover those neighborhoods. We have a type of special district called like our Special Coastal Risk District, or SCRDs for short. And those cover neighborhoods that have high coastal risk. And essentially there's like very strict regulations on like development. So that's could be one way. I can't remember if that's an area that affects like Red Hook, but that covers different parts of New York City that have high coastal risk.
Sure, maybe I can add a little bit to this. I think I understand that you're concerned about like, more development happening in areas where it's not really, like the ground or the land itself can't handle that development, right? So if, you know, the underlying zoning is still going to be like the underlying zoning, since this is not an hub zoning, it's a text amendment. So, in those areas that where, you know, that like level of density, like those types of buildings would be inappropriate, it would still be subject to what the local zoning is. Again, if there's also special districts, if it's like on the waterfront, that those rules would still end up being in place.
Thank you so much. From the chat, I think this is a good question, so we're gonna go ahead and ask. As an added incentive to affordability, can there be an increased taxes cost put on the developer who choose not to include affordable housing in their large-scale developments within areas that have an income below 40-60 AMI, also to avoid multiple large-scale luxury condos within these neighborhoods? And realizing that, I think that sounds more like a legislative proposal that has to be submitted to the council, so I don't know if you have an answer to that.
I mean, we can like speak to a little bit, but, interesting policy recommendation. I think there's a chair here who'd love to hear more about that. For city planning, where our toolbox is zoning and land use, we can't put forward new tax programs, unfortunately. But I hear you on that idea.
So
Yeah.
UAP, what is UAP? Isn't that-
UAP is a zoning framework. It's I don't know if I want to let other people hear this. UAP is a zoning framework, so if you're building that affordable housing, you get more FAR. That's what we can do at city planning.
That is a tax incentive, no?
That's a state tax incentive that will work well with UAP, but it's outside of city planning to like enforce or to create.
Yes, that's for developers. I'm pretty sure Susan knows a little bit of that.
I think there's an important differentiation there, that there are land use controls and there are tax programs and there are financing programs. And land use controls, as we're seeing, can be promulgated within the city, subject to state laws. Remember, the city can't do much on its own unless the state has given it the authority. But when it comes to things like tax programs, whether it's the 421A, whether it's the 485X that's starting, those are state laws. So one state law expires, another state law has been created by the state legislature. And so there are certain things that are, like I said, is a bonus. The bonuses are land use, are zoning. And that's within the power of the city. But the tax programs have to require a state law. Each one of those tax programs, J51 and all these other tax programs that people use in different ways, every one of those is created by the state legislature. The same thing with finance programs. You know, we talk about our programs, Eller and Mix and Match and the Open Door, which is the ownership program. The city's authority to utilize those programs, to give out money through those programs, comes from the laws. So it's not just something that, well, a mayor or somebody can just sit here and decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do. They're all subject to laws.
Thank you so much. And the last participant we have, before we wrap up.
Okay, so my name is Diane Wilson. I live in this district and I also own a business in this district, so I very much care about the trajectory of what's happening right now. So one of the questions that I have, and I have a few, right? The first one is, how does the city approve rezoning? That's one. Two, how many developers are contracted with the city to do? Because one of the things that I was able to hear tonight is that developers are the ones that are deciding basically what the community needs, is sort of what I understood. and we talked about parking, we talked about different things, but a lot of these buildings that are being erected in this neighborhood, it was on the chart, but I didn't see you mention it, is, supportive housing. We have a lot of supportive housing buildings, and a lot of the buildings that are being erected in my neighborhood, for example, there's at least 4 of them on my 2-3 block radius are supportive housing, 10 stories, residential area. When we first bought the home, they were residential. So now there's these great buildings right next to us that are not gonna be housing, it's gonna be supportive housing, small, cramped up apartments, because we looked at the amounts. The other thing is, I was really hoping, since we're talking about redistricting and zoning, that Salamanca would have been here tonight. He is the land use chair, and I was hoping to honestly have, I had a lot of questions for him actually. So, I'm kind of disappointed. I'm hoping that the next meeting, Thursday, either this Thursday or whenever, that he's gonna be there, because we really have a lot of questions for him. It's an election year coming up soon. He needs to show up so that we have a reason to vote for him, because right now, I don't.
Okay, yeah, so, just to piggyback off of that, the supportive housing component is, an area of concern, given that this district and the neighboring districts, including Community Board 3, 4, 5, and 6, have, an oversaturation of supportive housing and shelters. Why is the supportive housing component included in affordable housing? Because what we've seen time and time again is the using the words affordable housing as a crutch to build supportive housing. Developers consistently in this district choose to build supportive housing instead of building truly affordable housing, which is what you've been hearing from a lot of people and here and probably all over the city. So is there a way, maybe the deputy speaker can answer this, or you guys as well, is there a way to remove the support, because it seems to us that it's already easy to build supportive housing. Is there a way to remove that, where what the term affordable housing would truly mean affordable housing for, anyone else, working class families, things like that?
Thank you so much. And I think there was a lot of questions there that some of them, the questions are valid, but not necessarily pertain to the presentation tonight. So one takeaway from that is that if we can make a note for us in the committee on policy legislation and the housing committee, if folks want to get more clarity on what the zoning process is and the vote, like how does it go from, how does a proposal go from the community board to then the city council? I think it's a valid point, and that is a question posed here. With regards to developers, I'm not sure that you can necessarily add that, but if you want to give some clarity on what are some of the components on that piece, the supportive housing incentives in this proposal and the affordable housing incentives, please feel free to answer anything that you can.
Sure, there's a lot of great questions there, and I'll take a stab at the first one about just how rezonings are approved in general in the city. So it's subject to what we call the Euler process, which it stands for Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. So that's a public review process that it lasts about 9 months or so. Whenever someone wants to change the zoning for whatever reason, whether they want to do an upzoning or change the type of zoning of a particular location, they have to file an application with the Department of City Planning. We check to see if it's a complete application and then certify it, and then it sort of goes on this conveyor belt where it first gets referred to the community board. The community board has a 60-day window to review it and hold public hearings on it and to discuss it. Add their comments to it, and then it goes to the borough president's office, and then it goes to the city council, who has to ultimately approve it. And through that process, there's several opportunities for the public to weigh in on a particular project or proposal, and sometimes they do get changed through that process as well. So this is pretty much in a nutshell how these types of process, rezoning can happen in the city.
I definitely hear about the supportive housing and how that there's been a lot of development for supportive housing in this neighborhood. I think for your all's like community district needs statement for this year, you mentioned a desire for like more mixed income housing and creating more opportunities for mixed income housing. And I just wanted to like, this is one of those 10 neighborhoods that have produced as much housing as the other 49 combined. Like Bronx 1 is doing its fair share. It's one of the few neighborhoods that is producing a lot of housing. And I think the reality of the fact that you're seeing like so much housing happening here is because of like the zoning restrictions that are in other neighborhoods, and frankly, probably more like wealthier, politically connected neighborhoods that have those levers to block like supportive housing developments or to block affordable housing, or just frankly, the zoning doesn't allow opportunity for housing to happen. So that's also why like for these changes that we're doing or proposed changes that we're trying to do is to create more of the housing in other areas. So it's not just concentrated in these 10 neighborhoods like this one. It's to spread it out so that everyone can do their fair share of meeting our housing needs as well as our affordable housing needs and supportive housing needs.
Can I chime in a minute, Laura?
Okay, I would just add that to on supportive housing too, and because I'm from the Bronx office of Department of City Planning, and having shown this to other community boards throughout the Bronx, that it's definitely an issue that other boards also share, that it's that neighborhoods are taking on more than their fair share of supportive housing. They want to see more like a diverse mix of housing.
Just in terms of the supportive housing, just to explain a little bit of the process about the problem. The problem is that we do have, everybody knows, a homeless crisis in the city. And one of the ways that you fight homelessness is you provide housing. And so we don't, HPD, we don't build shelters, we don't finance shelters, transitional housing. So when a proposal comes in, we have a program that provides financing to do supportive housing. That is permanent housing. So we just want to make sure that by stuff is understood. The people who move into one of these buildings they get rent stabilized leases. They're like anybody else. If you want to live there for 40 years, they can. And so it's permanent housing. Again, we would hope that the more housing that gets built that accommodates people who have been in the shelters and are able to live on their own can be done. Unfortunately, the number of people in the shelters has increased over the last few years. But we do permanent housing for people who are currently homeless because it's necessary. It's really, unfortunately, that simple. But the more of this housing they do, and then let me just say, when other buildings are financed through our programs, there's a law passed by the city council that requires at least 15% of the units in that building be set aside for people who are formerly homeless coming out of the shelter system. And so that's the reason, procedurally, why this happens. And for the buildings that get financing through our program that do supportive housing specifically, those buildings are generally 60% of those building units are considered supportive units for people who are formerly homeless. And then the other 40% for the general population go through the lottery system. And then the people get selected like any other general population.
Thank you so much. And we are almost wrapping up, but before we do that, we are going to allow the Deputy Speaker, Diana Ayala, to say a few words.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, and Mr. Weinstein and I have had this conversation several times, is that when we're getting proposals for development, because there is such a significant backlog in the number of projects that are being funded, there is an incentive, right, if a developer is building supportive housing, then they get priority, which is probably why, we see the bulk of it is because people want to develop and they want to develop as quickly as possible and they want to make their projects more attractive to the city so that they can secure funding. I've been very, and it's a position that is difficult for me because I'm also the chair of the General Welfare Committee. And it is true that we have historically high numbers of people in shelter, and that, you know, these are families like any one of us that, you know, for whatever reason, they had a fire, they lost a job, have become homeless, and they deserve an opportunity to live in dignified, you know, permanent housing. And so the 15% set aside, which was actually Raul Salamanca's bill, I think, you know, was common sense, and that we shouldn't have had to have legislated that. That should have been happening anyway. But in terms of the supportive housing, I think we've been kind of jaded because the bulk of the supportive housing has gone historically to people that are suffering from serious mental health problems or substance use disorder. And while we want to do our fair share, it does create other problems, other social service related problems in the community. And so I've been fighting back on that because I feel like adding that as an incentive to develop in the South Bronx is unfair because we have done more than our fair share. And that shouldn't even be, you know, in consideration, right, when we're talking about future development. So while this is not part of this, you know, conversation, it is a conversation that is very present in my office. And, you know, I am very well aware that we are, you know, we've done exceptionally well, too well, you know, and that we haven't been compensated for that. And so I will not accept projects that are being imposed on us with a mandated, you know, requirement for supportive housing. And I've also changed and the mayor asked me to change this summer, which is really good, the types of, you know, residents that would qualify for supportive housing were typically, you know, primarily mental health, diagnosed individuals and individuals with substance use disorder. But now we also have young people aging out of foster care, which, you know, which we need. These kids we're not developing enough of them, we're not building enough of them, so they don't have anywhere to go. And a lot of them are ending up in shelter as well. So we should be doing a lot of that. Homes for domestic violence. We don't have a lot of supportive housing for them because they were not part of this category. So they didn't qualify. So those two things are happening simultaneously, and these are conversations that you should be having as well.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. Now, with that, I would like to wrap up this event and, you know, first and foremost, I would really like to thank the members and the staff of CD1 for helping us host this forum. There's a lot of planning, a lot of time that was put into organizing this event. So I want to thank our chair, Clarissa Aleyato, for her support, and Stephen, as well as Anthony Jordan, my committee vice chair, and our chair for the Policy and Legislation Committee, the Learning and Marine, for all of the effort put into organizing this, as well as all of the different panelists that were able to attend in representation of DCP. Thank you so much, HPD, ANHD, and our Councilwoman and Deputy Speaker Diana Ayala. Thank you so much. If you are around and you want to continue to learn and to give more input on these topics, I would like to encourage you to attend the Housing and Economic Development Committee meetings. They are always well attended, but you're always welcome to come. And next Thursday, this Thursday, on October 24th, we are expecting to hold a vote on this proposal, and that will be very important, so that way we can use that information and include those recommendations in our vote into the communication that will be shared with our local elected officials. I think that part of the effort that we want to do in this community board, and our goal is to do more educational events like this, to be able to analyze these very complicated proposals, but also, as our committee chair, the learning, has emphasized, writing our positions and being able to share that with different local elected officials. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. You're welcome to chat and connect with the presenters. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of the people who were able to join via Zoom tonight. Thank you, Sonia, from the Communications Committee, for all of your support. It wouldn't have been possible without you and the babies. So thank you so much.
Hi,